Shasta with the Orange County Library System here at the West Oaks branch in Ocoee, Florida. Today is February 19th, 2013, and I'm capturing memories from our community. Can you please tell us your name and where you're from?
I'm Doug Dillon. I'm from Altamont Springs in Seminole County.
Hello, Doug. So can you tell us how you came to be in the area?
Well, it was back in 1972. That was my first administrative post in Orange County schools. They were having a new program called the Curriculum Research Associates, and really that was the beginnings of the first assistant principals for curriculum in Orange County. So I was posted from downtown Orlando in the inner city schools where I was teaching out to rural Ocoee. Back in that day it was very, very rural, which was quite a shock for me because my initial teaching had been in the inner city. And then coming to a rural community like Ocoee, which is very rural, it was like very, very different. And the school was 7 through 12 in those days, junior, senior high school, where I had my posts. And some of the senior boys, they were walking around in their cowboy hats and their belt buckles and their boots and their skull in the back pocket. And so it was just unique because it's very much Ocoee in those days was citrus and cattle and horses. But what really struck me about the community was those kids, when I walked into the halls, they would look at me, smile, and say, "Good morning, sir." That was not something I had in the inner city school. It was a very different thing. And it was so, so nice. I enjoyed that a lot.
Huh. So it was more of a farming community?
It was, very much so. Yep, yep. Things changed over time, but it was interesting because the school, one of the stories I do want to tell, and that is one of the first things I was told when I got into the Ocoee community, is that, okay, now we got something going on here. And I thought, uh-oh, what? I was used to having problems on the inner city school, but out here I thought there'd be no problems. And I was told in no uncertain terms that Ocoee had a kind of a, Ocoee was still learning to be an multi-ethnic community, shall we say. And it had been integrated for a short time, but the students from the 7 through 12, junior, senior high school, had just elected their homecoming queen. And the homecoming queen was an African-American young lady. And that really shook up the adults in the community, and nobody knew what was going to come from this. And so with all this undercurrent when I was first there, but the thing is, in the end, the kids were the ones who determined everything went beautifully. This is what we're going to do. This is who we are. We're not going to listen to the old ways. And the adults kind of went with it, and it went beautifully.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
Huh. Can you talk about your earliest memory of Ocoee? Your first impression?
Well, the first impression really is what I told you, as coming into the community and seeing the rural community and seeing people in cowboy hats and belt buckles. That was the first vivid impression, so that was it. But I talked about Bob Williams, who was the principal at the time, and because he was my first impression, because he was the guy who was my first principal that I worked under as a school administrator. And Bob, a lot of people in Ocoee community, if they've been around a long time, they will know his name because he lived here. He was part of the community, and just one of the most wonderful people and a great school administrator, and really got me on my career, going on my career, which eventually I ended up in the downtown school board, and I was eventually ended up as director of staff development and volunteer services. And a lot of my training came from Bob Williams as to how to work with people in so many ways and how to deal with things such as problem ownership. And that may sound a little simple, but problem ownership was crucial. Whose problem is it? And he was an old country boy himself, and I'd come in as my brand new administrator thinking I really knew everything, and he could see there was a problem when I came into his office, and he'd say, "All right, pull the door too, Doug, and sit down." And I would get 2 or 3 words out, and he would say, "You're not going to put that monkey on my back." And what he meant was problem ownership. He always said there's a problem is a monkey on your back. And he would just say to me, "Nuh-uh, you're an administrator now, you're not a teacher. You're just going to have to take care of your own problems. You keep your own monkey." Yeah. But one of the first things he did was to say, "Okay, you've got all this great background. We have a big thing going on in Ocoee. There is now a big evaluation going on of the Ocoee Junior Senior High School. the Southern Association Evaluation, and we got this big team coming in. And Elmer Badger at the time, who was the agriculture teacher at Ocoee, great guy, he's heading up the evaluation for the school, and this team's going to come in, and I want you to work with Elmer. I want you to be the guy to put this physical report together, make sure it all fits, and work with a team, make sure they're happy, and keep everything together with Elmer. Because Elmer's teaching classes. You don't have classes, and you can do things that he can't do. So that was the stage that was set. The interesting thing is that I was probably 29 years old, my first administrative spot, and in comes this evaluation team, which had been pulled from educators throughout Central Florida. And in the team was my old high school principal from Winter Park High School, where I went to school. Rip Wilson was my school principal, who had since retired, and here I am working with my school principal, which is just a very unique situation. But in the evaluation process, the whole community was interested in this, because Ocoee Junior Senior High School from 7th through 12th, that was one of the last junior senior high schools in Central Florida. It was the old model for rural schools because you didn't have enough resources to be able to put everything in separate schools. So they said, we really need to have it upgraded. We need to have our own high school, but you're not supposed to use the evaluation to get that stimulated. But everybody hoped that all this data together would make that happen. And so the report came out from the group, and it said, you know what, this community definitely needs to have its own high school. We need to separate that out, because you had 7 kids who were coming out of elementary school working daily with high school seniors. And that was a very rough situation in so many ways. But they said, you definitely need to separate this out. And of course, that hit the school board, and they were like, oh, good gosh, we got to. But it took about a year, but eventually, that's how West Orange High School became the high school for the West Orange area, at least in those days it was. Ocoee Junior Senior High then became Ocoee Junior High School, and eventually Ocoee Middle School, and the gym at Ocoee Middle School then was named after Bob Williams. So that was a huge change, and it was just so wonderful to see that the community was able to have its just due in the education world. And then as I was working in the school district, I watched all this happen from a distance, but it just really made me smile.
What year was that?
That was 1972 and 73 when I think the final report came out. Yeah.
And how long were you at Ocoee?
I was at Ocoee for about 2 years in my administrative post, and then went to work at the school district. And then eventually I went into business in about 1980, and didn't do real well. I found out I was not an entrepreneur, and I decided to go back in education. I had enough I'd had enough with administration, and so I got in touch with Bob Williams, and he said, I have a teaching spot. You want it? I said, I'll be teaching. So I went out to Ocoee and became a teacher, classroom teacher again, where I was a school administrator, and worked under Bob Williams, and which was just delightful. In the 1980s, yep. And from there, Bob let me and some other teachers who really enjoyed working with the high-risk kids, the kids who were involved in alcohol, drugs, divorce, any kind of problems, let us work with those kids as best we could, given our classroom responsibilities. And from that, I actually went with my wife into Minnesota to a drug rehab treatment center and spent some time there with the people and asked how you can work with kids in dealing with drugs, because in those days it was the war on drugs a lot. We don't do as much of that anymore. And they gave me information, came back, and I took that information to the school board, to the people that I knew there, and said, here's some ways of doing things with students with drug and alcohol rehabilitation. And they just were at that point of trying to put something together like that, because as a teacher I knew there was nothing we really knew how to do effectively. They said, all right, let's take this information and put that together, and they actually created what they call the SAFE program now, Students Assistance for Everyone. And so they created that program and had state funding. And so Bob Williams at the time said, okay, Doug, you help stimulate that program, and they've told me I've got to have a SAFE coordinator in my school. Guess what? You're the one. Now, I had no idea that I would be doing that, but I was the first SAFE coordinator working with the high-risk kids, and from there I went to the school district working to set up programs throughout Orange County for high-risk kids, and as far as I know, that program's still going on. But a lot of that originated because Bob Williams allowed those of us to really find ways of dealing with kids, and that was some of his genius, taking people's interest and expertise and letting that flow.
And what subjects did you teach?
I taught geography and American history. Those are my areas, and that's where now I'm a writer. I've retired, and I write books for young people now. I write books that have paranormal into it and historical about St. Augustine, and also I've merged that. And my chief character in my book, the trilogy is called the St. Augustine trilogy, and the young man who's the star of the books is a kid who is very dysfunctional, comes out of some of the dysfunctional homes that I saw in so many ways, and so I use that as a background, and I weave history into it. This is my way to get back into education of writing books for young people.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about Ocoee?
No, I think that's about it. I think those are the main things, and without belaboring the points.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.